Assalamualaikum. Welcome to Study Smarter IAL Edexcel YouTube channel. In this video, I'm going to do a quick overview of IAL English Language Unit 1. So we're basically going to go through a past paper here. So paper 1, Context and Identity, it comprises of two sections, like paper 2, Section A and Section B. Section A carries 35 marks. And so that makes up like 70% of your AS English grade. And the rest of the 30%, they come from section B, which is of 15 marks. So now for section A, you're given two texts. You're given text A, text B, and which is in the source booklet, which is at the end of this paper. These two texts are usually or almost always linked with each other in terms of context, in other terms. In some terms, they're always linked, but usually in terms of context, in terms of the topics being discussed, right? So these two texts you're given, you're supposed to read them, and then you're supposed to solve section A, which says that you're supposed to analyze and compare how the language of both texts conveys personal identity, and there are some requirements for your answer. So you're supposed to make reference to relevant language frameworks. You're supposed to do all of these 3 bullet points, right, which we're gonna go through in a minute. So if you pay closer attention to your question, the question says analyze and compare. So there are 2 things that you should do that should be there in your answer. The first one is analysis of the 2 texts. Okay, there should be a clear evaluative tone of your answer. You read both of these 2 texts, right, and you see similarities and differences, right? This is what they want. They want you to do comparison. So you want to have similarities and differences in your answer, okay? And the tone or the way you're describing or the way you're constructing your answer should not be descriptive but should be evaluative, okay? So you need to critique, okay? Critique how 2 of these texts, they're different from each other or how they're similar to each other. Hope that makes sense. Now, the first, and in the question again, both texts, so don't stick with one text. So if you're reading text A, keep it side by side, right? If you're talking about certain things, if you're talking about the lexis, for example, of text A, right? If you're talking about the lexis of text A, talk about the lexis of text B right after, because you need to maintain a balance, okay, between the 2 texts. You don't want this imbalance that you're critiquing or evaluating text A more and you're not evaluating text B as much as text A, right? And then it says how it conveys personal identity. So you need to, identity, when you think of identity, it's usually very difficult for students to understand. What do they mean by identity? So identity of the speaker basically means how the speaker is using language, how the speaker is using lexis, okay, which is going to reflect who they are. The lexis or the language that they're using reflects who they are. So for example, if a person is using more, if a person is using more, let's say, emotive language, right? So that repetition of that same tone or the same way of constructing sentences or the same way of using language or lexis shows the person or represents or highlights the person or his identity or her identity as an emotional person, right? So it's basically when you see repetition of certain things, if you see repetition of manipulative behavior, you see repetition of emotive behavior, right? And how do you see that? You see that from language. You see manipulative language, that person has a manipulative identity, or the text highlights that person as a manipulative person. So if you see use of emotive language, you say that the text highlights this person as an emotive person or a vulnerable person. It depends on the context, right? And yes, so you should definitely include points, clear points that you've made to the context of both the texts and identity of both the texts. It's very important, because if you like, the name of the unit itself is context and identity. So this is something you need to be making references to every now and then in your answer, right? You make a point, then you link it to context. Okay, so this is happening, and this is happening in the context of this being this, or this is happening in the context of this person having such identity, right? And so I know it might seem ambiguous right now, because we're saying this person or that person, but in the future videos, inshallah, we're going to go through some past papers together, so we'll see how it actually, exactly how it works, right? So this is some of those things that your answer should definitely include, because if these things are not present in your answer, it makes your answer weak, okay, basically. So this is something you should definitely have in your answer. Okay, so if we go to the first bullet point, the first bullet point says you should make reference to relevant language frameworks, and you probably have done these in your class with your teacher, or somewhere else, wherever you study. These include things like lexes, like discourse, grammar, grammar, syntax, morphology, right? So it includes things like these. So you should make, your answer shouldn't be, if you're talking about lexis, you're just talking about lexis. Your answer shouldn't be like this. Your answer should include a range or variety of points or evaluative evaluative comments you've made on both the texts, right? Your answer shouldn't just be limited to a few language frameworks. It should be a diverse answer, an answer that covers different aspects of the texts given. You see what I'm getting at? Okay. The second bullet point says concepts and issues such as social, cultural, and gender factors. Now, these, it's very simple. Sometimes it might seem really complicated to figure this out from the texts, right? But sometimes it's pretty straightforward, in a sense that if, for example, you have two texts, and text A has a speaker that's a girl, okay, or a woman, and the speaker of text B, or the writer of text B, is a male, right? So there's a clear gender difference, right? So when you have a gender difference, you can just make a comment like, there are some theories that you're going to go through in your course. You're going to learn them, and you will see, for example, dominance theory, difference theory, how these theories, they show how men and women, they use language differently. And so you can make this comment that the speaker of text A, for example, is a male, and that of text B is a female. And so there are because of that, this gender difference, it influences how they are using language, right? This is what it means. Or when you're talking about social factors, so if is the person coming from a wealthy family, or the person is coming, or the speaker, and I'm talking about the speaker, right? So the speaker the speaker is using this language. What does it reflect? Does it reflect his social identity? Is the speaker using certain language, or using, a low frequency lexemes because he belongs to a rich family, or because he has this PhD or whatever, you see, right? And when you talk about cultural factors, so cultural factors like, if a person is coming from a very conservative family, or if a person is coming from a very distinct culture from around the world, right? So you can comment on these. Then when you talk about the third and the last bullet point, which says contextual factors such as mode, field, function, audience, these again, you need to include in your answer these. I mean, you should definitely include these because this is something they've asked you, right? Here, if you miss something, it's all right. It's going to be okay because you're going to be writing in a time constraint, right? So you might actually miss something, but don't you miss these, right? Because they're openly asking you to make comments on these, right? Now, another thing that you should definitely do in your answer, which I've I think already emphasized, is that you should make connections across data, and it's one of your assessment objectives, is that you are not limited. Your answer is not limited. What do I mean by this? Uh, First of all, your answer is not limited in a sense that it explores a range of concepts, a range of things that are possible, that the text possibly indicates, right? So that's that. And the second thing, your answer should not do to achieve this assessment objective is to have an imbalance. Imbalance, this is very commonly seen. If you've seen examiner reports or something, you will or exemplar answers, you will see that the examiners, they do make this comment that there is a slight imbalance. The speaker, or the student is making more comments in text A and less comments in text B. So you should maintain a balance, and I've already told you how you can do that, is that you take things side by side, right? You're making comment on Lexis for text A and then for text B. And then you're making comment on gender difference, for example, first on text A, then on text B. If you keep it side by side, you're maintaining that balance that's required. Right? So yes, we've already spoken about what your answer should not include. It should not just be descriptions. Okay? It shouldn't be the text says this, and the text says this, and the text shows this. It shouldn't be like this. They want you to do the analysis of the text. They don't want you to just state the differences plainly, right? So they want you to critique the texts, right? And how they're different from each other. So you should not have just descriptions in your answers and plain simple comments, right? That's the same thing basically. So these two things you need to definitely avoid in your answer. And all right, let's move to section B. So here we have our section B of paper 1. Section B is easy comparatively, but it's obviously you need to create something that's worthy of 15 marks, right? And it's 30% of your unit, and it can basically, if you don't do so well in this, it'll take you grade boundaries down, right? So what you're supposed to do in section B, you're supposed to create a piece of writing, and you're supposed to use the source booklet, okay? So what's the question saying? The question is saying write the text for an article. So they want you to write a particular writing style in your local newspaper, encouraging people to participate in an aid program in their community during a serious health crisis. Now, if you look at the question, it's very specific, right? Your local newspaper encouraging people to participate in this aid program in their community during a serious health crisis. It's very specific. So if it's easy, it's specific. So you need to stick with the question. And if you're not making references, clear references to the source booklet, you're losing marks easily, okay? This is something very clear. They've made it clear many times in examiner reports and exemplar answers, is that if the students are not making references to the source booklet, the text given in the source booklet, they're just losing marks, okay? Regardless of how well you create, they're going to give you some marks. It's not like if you don't make any reference to the source booklet, happens by mistake, you're losing all marks. It's nothing like this, but you're certainly losing marks. Okay, so there are a few common writing styles that are seen in the past papers. So there is speeches. They might ask you to write a speech, and they might ask you to write an article like in this paper, and they might ask you to write a report or a blog. So far these are the common writing styles that are seen in the past papers, and they're pretty easy in a sense that if you keep the audience and the purpose of the text in your mind while you're constructing this writing, it's gonna go well. So let's look at the question. The question says you're supposed to write an article for a local newspaper. So you can basically see what your audience is, what your purpose is from the question itself. So let's see what we're supposed to do here. Just taking this question as an example for what you're basically supposed to do in section B. So you're supposed to write an article, so that's your writing style. Who are you writing this text for is your audience. So you're writing this for your local newspaper. So you're writing this for a newspaper. Okay. So that means you need to maintain formality because it's for a newspaper. And then what is your purpose? This is your second. Okay, by the way, this tells you your register. And if you don't know what your what register is basically the degree or the level of formality, okay, of a writing of a text, of a speech. So it varies from context to context. If you're talking to, for example, let's say you're doing a speech and you're addressing teenage, you're addressing young people, you're going to maintain a semi-formal register. But if you're writing a report, for example, now reports are strictly formal, so you're going to maintain a formal register, right? Okay, so this here indicates your writing style. This indicates the register that you need, the possible register that you need, because we haven't read the question fully yet. So let's see. You have to encourage people. This means you need to use persuasive devices. What do you have to encourage people for? You need to encourage them to participate in an aid program in their community during a serious health crisis. Now, this is the context in which you're supposed to write your article. So you have your requirements clear. You know what you're supposed to write. You know your writing style. You know the register that's required of you. And you know how you're supposed to construct this answer, because its purpose is to encourage. So you need to do or construct or include certain devices, linguistic devices, accordingly. Now, who is your audience? When you're writing it for your local newspaper, audience is wide because it's a newspaper, so people of any age are going to read it. It's more likely people of older age and not of younger age, because young people don't really read newspaper. So you need to maintain a balance. You need to construct your answer or structure it in a certain way, in a way that it addresses, or it has the keys or the things to hook young readers into reading, and older people into reading this, right? Okay, so the common writing styles, they basically, this is how you decode the question, by the way. So common writing styles: speech, article, report, blog, and their register depends on the context. So if you're talking to speech, for example, you're talking to young audience, again, you need to have a semi-formal or informal tone, right? So this can be informal or formal. An article has to be strictly formal unless it's for some amusing purposes. It's for young audience again, right? So it's usually formal. Now, by the way, we're going to go through all of these writing styles in the future, inshallah, in later videos, in separate videos, and we're even going to go through how you can construct your answer, or include comments, include points for each language frameworks in separate videos. So stick around for those. Okay, so when you're talking about reports are strictly formal, okay? strict, what am I doing? Yes, reports are strictly formal, okay? This is just a general overview of these writing styles. And blog is basically catchy language, colloquials, because its purpose is entertaining. It has to entertain, so yes, it includes entertaining language. Now, all of these, by the way, they can vary depending on the context you're given. But there are some conventions that you will definitely have to stick to, right? So, for example, conventions of a speech might be greetings. You start with greetings. Conventions of an article might be that you're supposed to include evidences, surveys, statistics. You usually include statistics in articles, but in reports, you're including scientific data, you're including scientific evidence, investigations, studies, surveys to support or evidence the point you've made, right? Then, uh, yes, you're supposed to construct your writing. Second, okay, so here are things that you need to keep in mind when you're doing section B. So you need to construct your answer using the source text. Now, it is an advantage in a sense that you're not having to start from nothing. It's not like you're starting from scratch. If you're supposed to, if they ask you to write a speech in section B, and you're given a speech in text, in your source text, just go to them and see how they are structured, and just make some changes, and you can use those, use the way the source speech is constructed or structured, and you can quickly construct your own speech in a similar manner, but not exactly the same. It can't be copy paste. Don't copy paste, right? So you need to construct your writing from the source text. So it's like you're using source text as what should I say, a book that you're using. Use your source text as guidance, okay, as your Google. For the time being, the time you're in the exam room, your Google is your source text. You go and you see how things are done in your source text, or how the text has mentioned several points which you can possibly include in your answer in your section B, right? You need to keep the audience in mind, like I've mentioned earlier, is that if you're writing a speech, you don't keep your audience in mind. You're writing a formal speech, for example, your audience is formal, right? You're at a youth convention or something. If you're at a youth convention, you can't write a formal speech. I mean, you have to write a formal speech because you're at a convention, but again, your audience is youth. So you should include something that's going to make your speech engaging. So you need to keep your audience in mind, and then you can change the register of your text from formal to semi-formal to basically informal, right? So this is something you should keep in mind. Lastly, you need to make clear references. Again, this is I've mentioned it earlier, that if you're not making references to the source text, you're losing marks. So how can you make reference to the source text? You can add comments like, if there's a renowned personality in the source text, like a renowned footballer, right, and he says a quote, you can just quote like this person says this, like he said during this event or that event, and then you can just add this as a quote. Or there are statistics mentioned in your source text, you can use those statistics in your answer, right, to construct what you are constructing. So that's basically it for this video. Inshallah, in future videos you're going to see a lot more detail into how to attempt each of these questions, each of these sections, how you can allocate time for each section, how you can complete your paper in time, and much more. So stick around until then, and hope you find this video beneficial.